Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military with Summary channel. In this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. The energy truce has ended, and now the Russians have no obligations not to attack Ukraine with missiles and drones. Obviously, the Russians are not going to do this within the morning of the 1st of February of 2026. The Russians are going to wait. The Russians are going to wait for the results of meeting that is going to take place between Ukraine and Russia today, later today, on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. The Russians are waiting for an answer. The Ukrainians are going to be asked just with one simple question, whether the Ukrainians are ready to withdraw their positions from the rest of Donbas or not. But according to information we have, according to media, Ukraine is not going to give up Donbas and the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant. At least today this was stated by the president of Ukraine, Zelensky. Zelensky stated in advance that the Abu Dhabi talks would not yield results. Territorial issues cannot be resolved solely by technical teams, he told Prague International. Without direct contact at the leadership level, it will be impossible to reach an agreement on territorial issues. The territorial issue will be key at the meeting in Abu Dhabi on February 1st, where delegations from Ukraine and Russia will gather. Thus, Zelensky is making it clear in advance that no agreement on territorial matter will be reached, their Kyiv media reports. So this is a very important statement, but of course this is just the position of Zelensky, thus he is the president of Ukraine, but the Russians will wait for the end of the meeting on the territory of the United Arab Emirates. And after this meeting, the Russians will decide whether to attack Ukraine, whether to attack energy, objects of energy infrastructure or not. Meanwhile, another meeting ended on the territory of the United States of America in Miami. This time we are talking about the meeting between Kirill Dmitriev, special envoy of the Russian special envoy, and the representatives of the United States of America. Stephen Witkoff made a very interesting statement. He stated that today in Florida, Russian special envoy Kirill Dmitriev held productive and constructive meetings as a part of U.S. efforts to mediate a peaceful resolution to the Ukrainian conflict. The U.S. delegation including Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, Jared Kushner, and White House Senior Advisor Josh Greenbaum. We are encouraged by this meeting and by Russia's work to ensure peace in Ukraine, and we are grateful to Trump for his decisive leadership in the pursuit of a lasting peace. So this meeting ended. Most likely the parties were talking about business. Anyway, let's return back to Ukraine and let's wait and see what is going to be next. But as of the morning of the 1st of February of 2026, it seems that neither the Russians nor the Ukrainians are planning to send anybody to the United States, to the United Arab Emirates for this negotiation process. It seems that both the Russians are trying to keep details of these talks in secret. Meanwhile, we are receiving a very important update from Ukraine. It is reported that a Starlink speed restriction has been introduced to counter drones. The terminal disconnects at speeds of 75-90 km per hour. This measure applies to all terminals, so both Russians and Ukrainian drones have been affected. White lists are now being temporarily developed. Only registered terminals will be able to operate over Ukraine, which would rule out the use of Starlink on Russian drones. If the system cannot be bypassed, the use of BM-35 and Molniya-2 drones with Starlink may come to a rapid end. So this is a very important piece of news. As of now, both the Russians and the Ukrainians are not able to use drones at high speed with the Starlink systems, but most likely in coming days, weeks or months, the Ukrainians will be able to find a solution how to use these systems, Starlink systems, just for Ukrainian drones, and how to bypass these limits with the 75-90 km per hour speed. And then these can start bringing huge problems to the Russian Federation. I would like to remind you that since the beginning of January, we received dozens or maybe even hundreds of videos published by pro-Russian sources of how they were using these drones with the Starlink terminal, BM-35 and Molniya-2 drones, and how the Russians were attacking objects of air defense infrastructure, how Russians were attacking aircraft through the entire territory of Ukraine with these drones. And during the January of 2026, that was a very big problem for Ukraine. And this is the way how they resolved this issue. They decided to cut Starlinks for drones, both for Russians and for Ukrainians. It seems that the situation is desperate, so they were forced to do this. So obviously that was a very big pain. As for the Russian analog of this system, the sources are saying that the Russian analog is not ready yet. And of course, if Ukrainians and Starlink find the solution how to make Russian drones not to use Starlinks and to make Ukrainian drones to continue using them, then this can bring some problems to the Russians, and it's obviously. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of very important updates, and another day in a row, the Russians continue offensive operation in the northern directions, and during the previous 12 hours, the Russians improved their position significantly. The sources are saying that the Russians finished the battle for a very huge forest to the south of the settlement of Belaya Bereza. These are the changes on the ground between the dates. I would like to remind you that the territory between the village of Komarevka, Belaya Bereza, and Sidorovka was captured by Russians during the 2026, and now according to these changes we can see that the Russians are keeping advancing further in the eastern direction with the purpose first to establish complete control over the settlement of Sidorovka. All in all, the Russians are planning to establish a very powerful foothold on the Ukrainian side of the border. Most likely the next village of Chervona Zore is the next task of the Russians, and then the village of Babylivka. The Russians will try to establish complete control over the territory, and then Russians will continue advancing further and deep inside of the Sumy region. As for the Sumy direction, during the previous 12 hours, several pro-Russian sources stated that Russians began advancing in the direction of the village of Kondratovka. Based on the report published by a pro-Russian source, we adjusted the map. This is a very interesting situation, but I would like to remind you that the village of Kondratovka used to be under control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, but during the late summer Ukrainian counter-offensive operation, the Russians were forced to fall back from this area, and the Ukrainians restored control over the territory. Now the Russians are trying to recapture this village back again, and most likely when the Russians finish the battle for this territory, the Russians will continue offensive operation further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Khotin. So the sources are saying that the Russians are intensifying their offensive operation, and pro-Ukrainian sources confirm that the Russian army is conducting a large-scale offensive operation towards Sumy, increasing its troop concentration monthly since fall. So lots of updates, lots of probably things we're going to see from this direction during the late winter and early spring military campaign. Another important area, another important direction is the Kharkiv direction. During the previous 12 hours, we received lots of updates and lots of changes. This morning, the group of forces north stated that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to establish complete control over the settlement by the name of Zelene. Based on the report published by the Russians, we have adjusted the map. So yesterday, if you remember, the several pro-Russian sources confirmed this information yesterday, and this morning, pro-Russian sources confirmed this information officially. So based on this report, we have adjusted the map, but I would like to point to attention that the village of Zelene used to be under Russian control, probably in 2024 when the Russians just started the Kharkiv offensive operation. This village was captured, but later the Russians were forced to fall back, and now the Russians recaptured the village once again. But this is a very important question, whether it's just the media offensive operation or the Russians are planning to advance further in the southwestern direction with the purpose to establish control over the settlement of Skuchna and then further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Veselaya. Because these control over the village of Zelene could be just immediate attack, and the Russians improve their positions in this area just to get better and stronger cards before talks on the territory of Abu Dhabi. And when these talks finish, the Russians may leave this territory towards the settlement of Sirida. So everything is possible. We need additional information to understand what exactly is happening here. As for the most northeastern part of Kharkiv region, the Russians improved their positions around the village of Ovchansky Hutory. This information was confirmed by pro-Russian sources, and the Russians improved their positions in the most northeastern part of the region. The sources are saying that the Russians during the previous days established complete control over the settlement by the name of Krugle. But another important video was published yesterday by pro-Ukrainians, and here we can see how Ukrainians counterattacked Russians in the area of the village of Nisterne. So currently there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians introduced additional forces. The Russians, as we can see, improved their positions around Krugle, but at the same time we start receiving reports that Ukrainians are trying to recapture territories they lost. So currently there are very heavy clashes. The Ukrainians are tasked not to allow the Russians to continue advancing further, and the Russians are tasked to establish complete control over the territory till the village of Varvarovka and till the river of Volcha. At the same time, the Russians continue their offensive operation in the area between the river Voskol and the border between Russia and Ukraine. During the previous days, additional changes on the ground were recorded. This is the situation by the end of January, and this is the situation at the beginning of the 1st of February. The Russians captured additional forest around the village of Odradne, and the Russians entered another huge forest in the area of the settlement of Kamenka. And from these changes, we can see that the Russians are planning to advance further in the direction of the settlement by the name of Kolodezne and in the direction of this logistic line. The Russians will try to cut this logistic line physically from the north and from the south. This will allow them to cut the settlement of Kolodezne in pincers, and then the Russians will try to establish complete control over the settlement as well. So we see that there are at least three directions where the Russians are active in the northeastern part of Kharkiv region, and the Russians all in all are tasked to establish complete control over the northeastern parts of the region until the Pechenegi water reservoir. As for the Kupiansk-Slaviansk direction, during the previous 12 hours, we haven't received almost anything. Just a very interesting article related to the situation with this additional protection nets above the road. The sources are saying that due to weather condition, different highways are temporarily closed due to strikes by FPV drones and due to problems with these protection nets that fell on the road. Another important thing is that Russians continue offensive operation along M3 road. We have changes, as you can see. This is the situation by the end of the January, and this is the beginning of February. The Russians control up to 30% of Minkovka, according to different sources, and we have this video. In this video, we can see how Ukrainians were attacking positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation on the territory of the settlement, and based on this video, we came to the conclusion that Russians are established control over the southern part of the settlement. The rest of the village, as you can see, is in the gray zone, and according to different mappers, Ukraine doesn't control even a single, let's say, building on the territory of the settlement. So based on this video, we have adjusted the map. We see that the Russians continue offensive. As for the Konstantinovka-Dobropolye direction, nothing special. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 12 hours, we received several videos published by pro-Ukrainian sources when they were attacking edge positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation. And based on this video, we made a small adjustment to the map. So this is the situation by the end of the January, and this is the beginning of February. Just small correction to the north of the settlement of Gulyapole, but nothing special. So this is the situation. Another important video is coming from the road M30, and this is another kill zone, another death road or living road. Here we can see lots of vehicles of the armored forces of Ukraine that were destroyed when the Russians were attacking them with BM-35 drone using Starlink. So once again, this was a game-changing weapon, but now the Ukrainians managed to find at least a temporary solution how to reduce the Russian capabilities in this sphere. And these drones made lots of problems to Ukrainians during the previous several months. So this is the situation situation in this area. Now let's wait and see how the things are going to be developed, because from today, from the 1st of February, the Russians are no longer able to use these drones. They can use them, but they will have to use them with a speed less than 70 kilometers per hour, and which makes them a very good target for the air defense of Ukraine. So which means that Ukrainians will be able to destroy lots of these drones before they get the targets. So let's wait and see. This evening is going to be very interesting, and of course the situation during the night between the 1st and the 2nd of February will be very, very interesting as well. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds you condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.